And I want to start off with giving you a quote. This is a dear friend of mine, a gentleman called Ron Shaich. And Ron Shaich is the founder of Panera Bread, which is a very large, healthy fast food chain in the United States. And he has a saying, which is his mantra for his people. He says that our approach has always been to discover today what matters tomorrow, and then transform our company into a world that is unfolding before us. And I believe this is so true, because this is what you as a leader have to do in this new world. Our role as leaders in this world is to discover today what matters tomorrow. And this is what we've done the last 48 hours. And then be ready to transform our companies into this world. And of course, you heard about Ray Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns. Jeffrey Rogers did this in his opening remarks, so I'll spare you the details. But you might remember that most technology systems move and evolutionary systems move on this exponential curve. And Jeffrey already showed you this. This is exponential growth we see in population. Just as a quick reminder, the thing which is really remarkable here, and this is the most important thing to understand, is that not just individual technologies move on this exponential curve, like for example computing with Moore's law, but what happens is that they stack on top of each other. One enables more breakthroughs in others. And this is the reason why this curve looks the way it looks. This is the reason why we grew our population to 7.4 billion people on this planet and still have room to grow. It's also the reason why Ray Kurzweil makes this interesting statement where he says the change we're seeing in the next 100 years equals the change we've seen in the last 20,000 years. Let that sink in for a second. Like, and this is not just figuratively, this is literally speaking. The change we're seeing in the next 100 years will be bigger, equal or bigger than the change we saw in the last 20,000 years. Let me make this utterly clear to you. Do you remember this guy? Of course, right? This is Marty McFly. And if you remember, I'm dating myself here, but this came out in like 1984 and 1985. And, we all wanted to be like Marty. But imagine Marty. Like, take this guy here and bring him to today. Like, this is 1985. Like, he didn't have the internet. He didn't have smartphones. He didn't know about electric vehicles. He didn't know anything about genetics. The genome wasn't decoded then. Right? We had no idea about all these things. Like, a massive amount of change has happened since then. As a German, the Berlin Wall fell. Like, when he grew up, there was still Russia and the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall. And this was the car he was driving, of course. Right? Today, he would sit in this car. And here's how this looks like. This gentleman on the left is Marty McFly in the future. This is all of us sitting in a car in the future, and this is how the future will look to us.
I'm really mad that the option is insane. Like, it's not like just...
Why? That's perfect. Isn't that good?
That's a random, like... What's the future?
Because the car is insane, right? Everyone thinks the car is insane, so why not have, like an insane mode, right?
That makes sense.
So you just come to like a complete stop.
All right.
And then before you know it, you just jam.
Oh, shit, Brooks! What the fuck?
That's 70 miles an hour.
Brooks, oh, shit. First of all, you can't do that to people. Like, you gotta give people fair warning.
Why?
Like, you can't just say,
yeah, you can.
Brooks.
What?
I think I shitted in your seat.
So this is us, and this is the future happening to us. There's this idea of what we call the Gutenberg moment, right? Gutenberg invents the Gutenberg press, and we change the way we think about information. Ford invents the Model T, and we change the way we think about transportation. Thomas Edison invents the light bulb, and suddenly darkness turns into light. These moments happen, but they happen far between. They take decades, sometimes centuries to happen. And we're moving into a world where we have a Gutenberg moment literally every year. This is the crazy world we're moving into. And when you look at this crazy world, and just as a reminder, and this has been said by many, many different people, this is Bill Gates. What we tend to do is we overestimate the change which happens in the next 2 years, and we underestimate the change which happens in the next 10. What this means is that we look at the technology, we want it to be better, we are super excited about it, and VR is going to change everything next year, and it's not happening. But 10 years later, VR has changed everything. So keep this in mind as you're going through this world today, and keep in mind that this world moves on this exponential curve. Now, this is Alan Watts. He's a philosopher who said that the only way to make sense of this change is to join the dance. And I want to join the dance with you, and I want to talk about disruption. Because some interesting things happen in this world, and this is, I want to present to you 2 pieces of research we've been doing over the last 1.5 to 2 years. None of this has been publicly presented, so you're like one of the first people to see this. And here's what happened. The first question I'm asking myself as a business person is, we're moving into a world of abundance. We talked about this a little bit over the last 2 days. We're moving into a world where we change our perception from scarcity to abundance, and that fundamentally shifts the way we live our lives and the way we run our businesses. Let me give you an example. This here is what we call a scarce resource. This is a record. A record is made out of plastic. A plastic ultimately is oil. To produce this record, you need to pay money. It costs you money. It costs you about $7 to produce one of those records. To ship that record from me to you cost me money because I need to go to the post office and they ship it to you. For you to store that record costs you money. All these factors go away the moment I turn this into a digital good. The moment I turn this into an MP3 or a streamed item, now suddenly something fundamentally shifts. The fundamental properties of these items change. The cost of creation, the cost of duplication, distribution, and storage go down to 0. It cost me nothing to make a copy of this, or very close to nothing. It cost me nothing to send that copy to you, and it cost you nothing to store that copy, which means that the business models fundamentally shift. Now, here's an interesting thing which also happens, which is you take the good old compass, which is a way for us to find our way. And we make this a little bit better by adding information to it. So now we're creating a map. But this map still has the old properties, right? It cost me money to make a copy of it. It cost me money to get that to you, etc. Now I turn it into a digital map, and those properties change. But something else happens. Because now it's digital, it adds features. It adds features because now I can do routing on this map. And the features it adds is now I can make changes to this map very easily. I can send you a new version of the map overnight without you knowing it. I can connect these maps to each other. I know exactly where each car is which is using the map and see what the traffic patterns are. I can make this measurable. I can measure this exactly. I can see how much you use the map and how where your car is, and can do so using software. I can programmatically do this, which means that the features go up into infinity. And this changes the way we think about businesses dramatically. Because the question for me becomes, in a world of abundance, how do you make money? How do you make money in a world where all this stuff becomes abundantly available? And our research indicates that there's only 2 ways, broadly speaking, how you can make money in this world. And the first one is this. In a world of abundance, you can create uniqueness, rareness, artificially. And I show you 4 ways you can create uniqueness today. The first one is this here. There is absolutely no reason that a Louis Vuitton handbag should be $4,000. Now, my wife disagrees with me on this. Of course. But if you look at a Louis Vuitton handbag and you compare it to a nicely made $300 leather handbag, they're no different. You compare it feature by feature to a plastic bag, which is 10 cents, no difference. But of course you pay $4,000 for it because brands matter. I pay for brands because I want to be part of the Louis Vuitton club. Of course. Here's the second one. Now, granted, and you're very lucky, I just heard you opened your first Starbucks. The devil is in this country, just saying. But if you have traveled outside of Italy, you know these guys, right? And these guys charge you $5 for a cup of coffee, which is insane. But we're still happy to pay $5 for a cup of coffee at Starbucks because what they create is social connection. Starbucks' mantra is, we are the third place. There's home, there's work, and there's Starbucks. So social interactions is we pay for that, we love it, we want it. And thus, we pay $5 for a cup of coffee. And of course, I hope Starbucks is not successful in Italy. If you've ever been to an Apple store, what's remarkable about an Apple store is they're effectively empty. Apple probably sells you 500 products. And all these products you can buy in any other electronics store. If you go into a good electronics store, you can buy any of these products. But Apple, to this day, is the highest grossing chain store in the world by a very large margin. They sell you more stuff than any other store on a per square foot basis than any other store in the world, which is crazy. But what Apple has created is an experience. You walk into the Apple store, and the Apple store is a temple. It's glass and steel and wood, and they don't have people who sell you stuff, they've got geniuses. And you don't go to a cash register to pay for it. The people are like there with their phones, and they just charge you wherever you are. So you create an experience. And the last one is this here. I was recently in Berlin, and I walk into a pop-up store from Adidas. They scan my feet, and about 90 minutes later, I walk out of this store with a 3D printed pair of shoes, which fits perfectly to my feet. We're moving into a world where personalization becomes a thing. Now, of course, in the digital world, we have this forever. Your Facebook looks different than my Facebook. Your Google looks different than my Google. In the physical world, it's still really hard. We talked about 3D printing today. But we're getting there. Slowly but surely, we're getting to a world where we create products which are made for you individually. And those you pay for, of course. So this is number one. And then there's a second one. The second one is, if you're in a world of abundance, embrace abundance and become the platform. When you think about platforms, there's three important pieces around platforms. The first one is this. The reason why Amazon was successful in the beginning is the fact that Amazon gave me access to 1 million books, where every other bookstore gave me access to about 30 to 50,000. So what they do is they provide me access. They give me access to this ocean of products. If you remember buying software until very recently, until about a year or 2 years ago, the way you bought software was you walked into a store, you bought one of these boxes, you walked with the box, you walked home, you opened the box, you pull out the CD, you put the CD in your computer, you try to install the software, you realize that the CD is scratched, you need to put it back in the box, you go back into the store. Today, we make this incredibly easy, because what you do today is you click, and 20 seconds later, the software is on your computer. This is the iOS store, the macOS store, the Windows store. That's the way we sell software today. They have become platforms. Here's an interesting tidbit, by the way. I just did some research on platform business models. The iOS economy, so both iPhones and everything which is being sold in the store, by 2019 will be $500 billion US. $500 billion US. That is more than the GDP of Argentina. So this is how powerful these platforms are. And the last one is this here. Anyone here is using Spotify or Apple Music or any of these other streaming services? Great. So I use them as well. I'm a Spotify user. And let me tell you one thing. Spotify is useless. For a simple reason. Spotify gives me access to 120 million songs. I remember 50 to 100, probably. So if Spotify wouldn't do something very clever, I would listen to the same 50 to 100 songs all day long. But what they do is, and this is really important, they curate. They provide curation. And curation is this magic thing, because curation allows me to sit at home, and this is a true story. I was with my wife, and we're cooking Mexican dinner. And I go on Spotify, and I type in Mexican dinner playlist. And of course there's a Mexican dinner playlist. And we end up listening to mariachi music for 2 hours from artists I have never heard before and songs I've never heard before, but they curated this playlist for me. So this is the power of these systems. And here's the challenge. Most businesses today find themselves at the tension between these two things. They're in the middle. And I believe the businesses of the future need to choose. And by the way, you can also do both. Some businesses can do both. Amazon embraces abundance and at the same time creates uniqueness. Like your Amazon looks different than my Amazon. Your Amazon playlist is different than mine. But this is the future of businesses. So this becomes deeply disruptive. And talking about disruption, I want to clean up with a notion about disruption. So we've been using a formula for disruption for a really long time, which comes out of this book. This book is called The Innovator's Dilemma. It was written by Clayton Christensen, and is a phenomenal book. Came out about 25 years ago, and Clayton was the first person to develop a model for how disruption looks like. And the model is very powerful, and I want to show you the model if you haven't seen it. Before we get there, though, I want to talk about one important distinction, which is the difference between innovation and disruption. Innovation is doing the same things, but doing them better. Right? So you make toothpaste, and your new version of the toothpaste is toothpaste super. And then you do toothpaste super white, and then it becomes toothpaste super, super white. That is innovation. Every once in a while, we do new things, but they haven't yet become disruptive. So you, instead of doing toothpaste, you do a mouthwash which cleans my teeth. Not quite disruptive yet, because only when we do new things which make the old things obsolete do we create disruption.
I used to work at Google. I was wearing Google Glass on the Google campus. This is a real picture of my parents, whom I made to wear Google Glass. And if you remember Google Glass, it had a couple of flaws. It was very expensive. The battery life was terrible. The features were pretty mediocre. And as my parents will attest, you look like an idiot when you wear it. Briefly, after I took the picture of my parents, this picture made the rounds. These are three of the most powerful Silicon Valley investors. This guy here is Mark Andreessen, who invented the web browser. When this picture made the rounds, we started calling people who wear Google Glass, glass holes. Now, I'm really interested to see how the translator is actually translating this. Good luck. So, 2018, so 5 short years later. So again, Google Glass is a terrible product, right? We can all agree. What the problem is with Google Glass is then it's a bad product, so you're dismissing it. You say, oh, it's not good, it won't be good. But 2018, something interesting happened. 5 short years later, our friends in China roll out this. They equip 18,000 people at their borders. So this is airports, train stations, border patrol stations, with a Chinese version of Google Glass, which looks and feels very much like Google Glass. But what this product does is, it does facial recognition. I look at you, and within 100 milliseconds, 1/10 of 1 second, it compares your face to a database of 100,000 wanted criminals and tells me visually if you're one of those or not. The first weekend the Chinese use this, they arrest 28 people. Now, this is Google Glass. This is the Chinese version of Google Glass. It doesn't look all that much different. Right? What has changed is AI in the back end. So the underlying trend, and when you come to Singularity University, this is haunting you in your nightmares, this graph. This is, of course, the exponential curve. Most technologies, such as computing, for example, moves on this curve. It doubles every time period. In the case of computing, every 2 years. When you draw this, it looks like this. This is what we call the hockey stick. Now, the challenge is this. When you stand someone where this friend here stands, and you look to the past, which is again the only reference point we have. When you look to the past looks always very flat and linear. But when you have the ability to look to the future looks really weird and crazy and steep. Ernest Hemingway wrote a book. It's called, the book is called The Sun Also Rises. In this book, he has got a quote. The full quote goes like this. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asks. 2 ways, Sam responds. Gradually and then suddenly. Now, wow, that was a loud laugh over there. I don't want to look at your financials. Now, the important piece is technology has this tendency. Like technology takes a long time for technology to develop, but then suddenly it seems to hit and change everything. So we're going to explore this a little bit further today. Ray Kurzweil, one of our co-founders and one of the world's leading experts on artificial intelligence, 20 plus years ago wrote an essay called The Law of Accelerating Returns. And in this essay, he makes a very important point. And that point, I believe you understand. He said that the rate of change in many systems moves on an exponential curve. And again, I don't need to preach this to you, you know this. But I think what we still don't fully understand is the fact that the real change happens when technologies stack on top of each other and they start to enable each other. Here's an interesting example. This is population growth over time. The first time we exploded in our population was when we had the first agricultural revolution. This was the first time we used technology to allow us to create enough calories to feed ourselves without using, the whole day to do so. Now that allowed us to have an abundance of time, and with that abundance of time, we start to invent new things. So we start to invent the steam engine, and the steam engine gives us an abundance of muscle power, and with that abundance of muscle power, we invent new things. So we invent electricity, and this gives us the electric engine, which allows us to distribute power wherever we want it. So technology stacks on top of technology. Ray Kurzweil has a very famous saying, and I hear a lot of people repeat this, but I don't think they understand it. Ray says that the change we're seeing in the next 100 years equals the change we've seen in the last 20,000 years. Again, a lot of people say this, I don't think a lot of people understand it. So let me make this super clear to you. Imagine we do something really crazy. We invent a time machine, and with this time machine, we don't go to the future, but we bring back an old friend of ours. So we bring back Jane Austen. Jane Austen lived in London in about 1700. And of course, you know her. She wrote a bunch of books such as Pride and Prejudice. So imagine we bring Jane to Mexico City today. How do you think Jane Austen, 250 years later, would experience Mexico City? She would probably go mad, right? Like she would probably literally step out of her time machine, look around, see all this change, and die. So now imagine Jane somehow miraculously survives and takes our time machine, and then she has the same idea. She says like, wow, I want to do this. This is crazy. I want to give someone else the experience. So she brings back an old friend of hers, the Mona Lisa. And the Mona Lisa lived about 250 years prior to Jane Austen, of course. So she brings her to London in 1700. And how do you think the Mona Lisa will experience the world? She will walk through London and say, it just looks the same. The only thing which has changed is you have the steam engine. So for Jane Austen to repeat the same craziness, the stepping out of your time machine and dying, she needs to bring back someone who has not seen the agricultural revolution 13,000 years prior. Let me make this utterly clear. Do you remember this guy? Yeah, of course. It's like, I grew up on this guy, Marty McFly, Back to the Future. This was 1984, 1985-ish. This guy has not seen mobile phones. What you're doing there is magic to him. Like he has not seen the internet. He has not seen anything. And we remember this guy. The only thing which hasn't changed for him, luckily, is his car. Because this was his car back then. This is the car he drives today. Same car, luckily. Okay. So you have heard of Moore's Law. Moore's Law says the number of transistors on an integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. We know this. Computing gets twice as fast at the same price point. Now, Ray Kurzweil did something really interesting. He said, we know Moore's Law is true for 50 years. We also know that Moore's Law comes to an end. Just the physicality of computing needs to come to an end. So he said, I'm interested in a slightly different number. What I'm looking at is how many calculations can I perform per 1 second per $1,000. And then he looked at data prior to Moore's Law. He said, how stable is this trend over long periods of time? And then he plotted this, and this is a logarithmic plot, which is the reason why you see it as a linear line, though it's an exponential trend. And what he found is that Moore's Law is true for more than 110 years. And now it gets interesting. So we recently redid this graph, and we showed that the graph stays true until 2018 at least. We don't have 2019 data, of course. Now you can take this graph and do something really interesting with it. You can take this graph and extrapolate it into the future, determine what the future will look like. And when you do this, you can determine the point in time when you have a $1,000 compute device, literally your iPhone, which will have the raw compute power of a human brain. And that happens in just 10 years. In 10 years, you will buy your next iPhone or your Samsung phone or whatever you want to buy, and that phone will have the raw compute power of a human brain. And then it gets interesting. Remember, it doubles every 2 years, because then 2 years later, you've got 2 human brains, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16. And by 2050, 2060, you will have 7.4 billion brains in a single $1,000 compute device. Tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. I was recently with Munich Re, it's a large reinsurance company, and I was with their CEO, and I asked him a simple question. I said, what is your competitive advantage? And the CEO said, well, we employ 1,500 of the world's best data scientists. We are better than anyone else in the world at assessing and pricing risk. And I said, I believe you, because you're very successful at doing so. But you do realize that in about 20 years, that advantage is gone, because then I will have all your data scientists in my pocket. So you better get good at something different. So here's the challenge. Albert Allen Bartlett, who taught these exponential trends at UC Boulder, once said, the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. What he means by this is very simple. We make sense of this world in a linear fashion. We're really good at linear thinking. Exponentials, not so much. Let me show you. Imagine you took 30 linear steps, one step after the other. You know exactly how far it is. You know it is 30 meters. But more importantly, if I were to ask you, you have a feeling for it. If you were to go on the street and I would say, show me, you would know how far it is. Now imagine you take 30 exponential steps. Every step is twice as far as your last step. How far do you get? It's really hard, right? It's 2 to the power of 29. It's 1 billion meters. But more importantly, how far does it feel? How far is 1 billion meters? It's impossible. It's like most of us can't do this. It's 25 times around planet Earth. It's from here to the moon, back from the moon, halfway to the moon again. It shows you 2 important things. The first is linear trends get you to 30, exponential trends get you to 1 billion. More importantly, you cannot feel it, which means you have to sit down and do the math to understand this world. Now, if you plot this, exponential trends in technology, our linear thinking, we've got 3 important pieces. Point number 1, disappointment. Remember, Google Glass, it's not good, but you want it to be better, so you're disappointed. But eventually, technology gets good. And then you've got this moment 11 years ago when Steve Jobs gets on stage and shows you the iPhone. And you realize a phone isn't a phone anymore, a phone is a mini computer, and it doesn't have buttons anymore, it has glass. And then you get to chaos and amazement. It's like where you can't keep up with the changes in the world. The most important thing I can tell you is you have to change your thinking, because if you don't change your thinking, this is your path to doom. I want to talk about this a little bit more. I want to talk about disappointment a little bit more, and I'm not talking about crying hipsters. They're very funny to talk about. I want to talk about, so super quick show of hands. Who here is in retail or has direct ties to retail? Okay, a few of you. For everyone else who's not in retail, use this as an allegory. This is a story for you because it's important to understand. I want to talk about this. Any one of you is using Alexa, Siri, Google Now, Cortana? A few of you. Okay. So first of all, let me just start with, this is magic. It is magic that I'm able to talk to my phone. This is Star Trek in the making, right? But most of the time, it's just not good enough because most of the time, it sounds like this. Like this? No. Like this. Can we play the sound? No. Can we play the sound?
What time is my appointment on Sunday evening?
You have 4 appointments last Tuesday at 12 a.m.
I said, what time is my appointment on Sunday evening?
You have 4 appointments last Tuesday at 12 a.m.
I'm not asking about Tuesday.
I don't know what you mean by, I'm not asking about Tuesday. How about a web search for it?
So this is what we call the Siri fail. I mentioned to you, you used to work at Google. I've got, I think, 8 of these Google Home devices at home. And my wife and I love nothing more than just walk through the home and ask the device questions we know it can't answer just to see how stupid it is. But here's the interesting thing. So again, it's very easy to look at these devices and laugh about them, right? Of course. But these devices are only, Siri's only 8 years old. It's a child. Now, of course, it didn't have time enough to learn. But what about if I tell you that these devices are currently doubling in their capacity every single year? They get twice as good every single year. So the question then becomes, how good will they be when they're a young teenager? Right? How good will they be in another 8 years? Now, you're exponential thinkers, because if you ask that question just the normal person, what they do is the same math all over again. They say, okay, so from 8 to 16 is 8 years. They get twice as good, so 8 times 2. Now, you know that's not true. You know it's 2 to the power of 8. And that is 128 or 256, depending on where you start. Okay? Now, the question is, what does it even mean if these systems become 128 times as good? Now you need to break it down to first principles. You need to say, what are they made of? And there are only 3 things. It's voice recognition, understanding what you say, cognition, understanding what you mean, and a bunch of services it connects to. You multiply this out by 128, and you will find that Siri and Google Now and Alexa in 10 years will be better than any human in understanding you. Let me repeat that. Better than any human in understanding you.